Okay, Be'ez Hashem, Perek Chof, Gavaldik. We're getting close to halfway through the Sefer, by the way. Gavaldik, almost there. Okay, so we're about to start. It's a Hemshuk, but it's also an Isaac also, which means we have been discussing, specifically in the last Perek Gutes, how even by Rishoyim, this dormant, hidden love that we've been speaking about can be awakened. Now, the Heilige Tanya wants to answer the following kasha, which he mentioned earlier, which is, you told us it's korov ma'od, right? It's very close to every single one of us. Well, that can't be korov ma'od only in life and death experiences, only when a person gets threatened to like Judaism or your life. Come on, it's got to be a little bit more korov in a bit more common everyday cases. So for the next be'erech, if I'm not mistaken, four parakim, he's going to be discussing this inyan. Okay, so bear with us for the next four parakim. I'm going to try B'li Neder to do this before Purim, so we can chap this in before the end of this month, because otherwise we're going to have a long break. Although maybe we should do this this month, which should also be Shmak, and we can finish off some more parakim. We'll last the item towards the end of this month. We'll see what we do. Let's go, Rabbi say. Let's try to finish the parak today. V'hinei. Mudas zois lakol. It says known to everybody. Chi mitzvahs v'hashochas avodas hoche. The mitzvah and the warning against avodas hoche. Shehem. Shnei dibros are rishonim. A few weeks ago, Parashas Yisroi, we had the Aseret dibros, and the first two dibros are, of course, Anochi va and Lo Yeh Lecha, which of course means no other gods and only Hashem. Heim klolos kol haTorah kula. This essentially is every mitzvah, because every mitzvah you do is basically rejecting Avodah Zarah and proclaiming that the Rabbanu Shalom is one. Key, because dibur Anochi Koilel kol ramach mitzvahs asay, va la yelecha koilel kol shesar mitzvahs lo asay. So the very first two aseret sedibros is koilel 613 Taryag mitzvahs. V'lachein shomanu anoichi v'la yelecha, those two hearings levad mipnei gvura from Hashem. K'mayim Rebbe Seinu Zal. The Gemara tells us in Machkas Daf Chav Gimel mipnei sheim kololus haTorah kula. So generally, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't really have to say the rest of their Aseret Dibros, because everything is included in the first two Dibros. All of our hative in is that. Let's try to explain this a little bit more deeper. What does this mean? We have to really explain, what does it mean, this idea that the Rabbanu Shalom is Yachid Umeyuchad? So in the Sifrei Kabbalah and the Sifrei Chasidus, they talk a lot about this inyan of one God, one Hashem. That doesn't just mean rejecting all of the other intermediaries, like the Rambam talks in Hilchos Deis about the sun and the moon, and how they started doing Avodah Zarah of those that in between Hashem and everyone else. So that's not what it means. But it means the denial of any existence outside the Rabbanu Shalom. He's going to get more into detail over here. By the way, it's interesting how various different places quote different things. So, for example, in the Chumash, we know Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That's all it's mentioned. That's the way it's described of Hashem Echad. The Medrash and Medrash Rabbah says Hashem is Echad Umeyuchad. Right? The Arizal, which many Sifrei Chasidus bring after that, is Lashon of Echad Yochid Umeyuchad. Okay? So we have to understand that one by Hashem, Rambam discussed this at Arichas, one by Hashem is very different than one in anything else. So for example, if I would tell you that in my house I have one table, that doesn't mean I only have one table. That means I have one table for sure. And I also might have other tables, but I only have one table that I'm talking about. One, when we say Hashem Echad, Hashem is one, it's very different to that. It's coming to exclude everything else and talk only that there is only Hashem. We're going to explain this now in more detail. V'chol ma'aminim shulavadoi hu k'moisha haya kodim shenivra oila mamish is like the Rabbanu Shalom before the creation of the world. Shayu hu levadoi, there was only Hashem. Or k'moisha oimim, like for example we say, Lo'olem yadam atuhu ad shaloi nivra oilam. As Rabbanu Shalom, you were alone before creation. Atu mishanivra v'cholei perish. Hu mamish beli shum shinoi. That means even after the Rabbanu Shalom created the world, it is still Hashem that is the only existence in the entire universe. Kiddiksiv, like the Pasuk says, Ani Hashem lo shonisi. Nothing was changed even after creation. Ki olam hazeh This world and all the universe and all the world and the galaxies. When the Rebbeinu Shem created something from nothing, nothing was changed afterwards. There's still only one Metzias, and that is the sole Metzias of the Rebbeinu Shem. Again, interesting how the Tanya uses this lashon yochid umiyochid, which is what we said is the lashon of Medrash Rabbah, unlike the lashon of the Arizal. But I'll upon him, keinu levadoi hu yochid umiyochid achashabam. That even after creating all the world, the galaxies, the universe, everything, Hakadosh Baruch Hu is still yochid umiyochid, only one. Mishum, the koloi kamei kolo choshev. We said this many times. Klape Hashem. When you look at there's nothing else. Everything else is considered nothing. Uka'ayin ve'efes mamish. That means the world, of course, exists, but it's in Hashem's presence. That means the world as we see it or as we know it has no independence on its own. There's no such thing, because that would be outside of Hashem. That means that the world has no existence and identity on its own, but it's rather part of what? Hashem's existence. Right, the upper and the lower world at the end of the day came into being from ma'ayin leish, from nothing to something. And the chiyus, the energy, the life that continues to give it, so it doesn't turn into nothing. So that means the Rebbeinu Shem creates something from nothing, and the energy that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave it, He continues to give it, and if He wouldn't give it, it would go back to being nothing. So everything in the world is energized, is being fed, is being alive, so to speak, even on a physical, even this table in front of us, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is constantly giving it that energy. Because if He wouldn't do that, it would go back to nothing. So everything really hasn't got its own identity and its own existence. It's all part of Hashem. You with me? Little bit deep. Ula mashal he gives. I'll give an example over here, and this, by the way, this mashal comes straight from the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. K'moy b'nefesh ha'odam, the neshama v'yid, k'shemedaba, dibur echad. A person speaks, she'dibur ze levadoi k'loi mamish afilu legabe kloros nafshem medaberes. That means that even in the general power of speech, it's nothing tangible, there's nothing there, there's no mitzias, there's no existence. That means what we're saying over here is the significance of the word at the end of the day. Right, at the end of the day, it's there's no tangibility, there's nothing to it. And for sure, if you go even before the speech, which was the thought process, the machshava that went on before you spoke, right? If a word at the end of the day, as we're saying, nothing compared with the power of speech, then for sure it's nothing compared to the power of thought. You don't have to tell me. We spoke about the 10 spheres. That means the Maisa, what we're saying over here is that if by a human being words are be'etzem insignificant when you compare them to higher powers of speech, so we can understand that with Hashem's kaviyachol speech, which Hashem created the world and still keeps it going, it's also not significant compared to Hashem Himself in that way. Yeah, that's what it is. I'll just give you a very random example, but this is some idea. You know, the Holocaust survivors were known, at least years ago, not so much Baruch Hashem, at least anymore, those that are alive, you know, were talking about their experiences. But in the beginning, none of them wanted to talk about their experiences. They were very, very quiet and private. They never wanted to spell out what happened to them. And the question is why? So one of the many reasons, but one of the reasons is when you say something, it quantifies it. You put it into some kind of box. This is what happened to me. And subconsciously what's going on in their minds is, I cannot put this into words. Because when I put it into words, I'm making it into, this is what it was. And it was way worse than that. And therefore that's why they didn't want to put it into words. And so obviously they were persuaded to do that. What he's saying over here is that the dibur that we have is really be'etzem, nothing compared to the source that it comes from. So therefore, kol shekein, the Rebbeinu Shem's kaviyachol speech when he created the world and continues to energize it, is also nothing compared to Hashem Himself. Ki, let's continue. HaMachshava Right, now we're talking about the garment, right? The spiritual garment of thought over here that we're referring to, which of course are like the letters, like the garment of speech. They're much more spiritual. Right, if they're in Makar, that in the Machshava, they're no at that stage, at that situation, they are not yet formed into letters, adain yet. Right, the 10 powers that we're talking about, that we've spoken about many times, are the deep core, which represent the intellect and the emotional energy, whatever it is. That's behind what you're thinking. And therefore what we're saying is, in the deep core, there's no letters, there's no forms at that stage. Let's say a person, something happens and he develops a tremendous love for something. It hasn't even exited, hasn't come out of the heart, to the brain, to think, it's not formed into letters at that stage. It's just something in the heart, it's like a feeling, it's an emotion. That he's getting into there. Before the taiva or the chemda came into his heart, the oyster dava for that item, it was a known fact. He'd love to learn something specific. He'd love to learn some kind of lomda, some kind of chachma, some kind of wisdom. It's a feeling, it's an emotion. You can't quantify it, you can't put it into words. There's no oasis at that stage. Or he wants to eat something. Again, it's a feeling inside him. It hasn't even been expressed in the brain right now. After it's gone into the heart, it leaves the heart, and it goes to the brain. That's the koyach of thinking. To contemplate, to think. How can I make? That's what the brain does. The brain says, no, there's the heart. It's all psukim and Krishma. Starts in the heart and then moves on. So it starts in the heart, and at that stage you can't express it, you can't quantify it. It goes from there to the brain. Once it goes to the brain thinks, okay, how can I get this to be lamaisa? How can I get that food that I want? How can I learn that thing that I want to learn? Lahasiga meichel, to get that meichel, that food, or the midas hachachma b'poil. How it become noldu b'chinas oisis. Oh, now born are those letters, but moichen is brain. That means lamaisa, what it's telling us in this Gevaldige Perek or Perek Chof, that there's so much more, right? That in other words, let's say like this: there is no existence in the world that we see, in the physical world, in any way, shape or form, that is separate to Hashem. It's all a chelik of Hashem. It's all part of Hashem. It's being energized by Hashem in that case. And that means the Rabboni Shalom in any way, shape or form remains alone and a pure, exclusive koyach in this world. You'll ask me, what's the nafkamina, why we learn this? We're going to have to continue Be'ez Hashem Perek Chav Aleph.